All right, welcome to the Exodus Files session number 2. Thank you guys for being patient tonight. Waiting for a few extra minutes before we got started. I was running an event for some friends, a wonderful prayer ministry with a bunch of great ladies that were doing some awesome stuff. So tonight I was covering some of that. So tonight we are going to be doing a special session here on the power of adoption. So this is a night that we're looking at Moses and we're looking at his life. And the big idea, the hypothesis here for Moses is if he was actually a biblical figure, and which I believe that he was, and he was basically second in command in all of Egypt, wouldn't there have been some sort of a record of his life in Egypt? So tonight we are going to take a look at some of those stories and show you some of the history of Moses in Egypt and a handful of different things. So I'm grateful that you're with us. So we got folks from Gunter, Texas. Good grief. Y'all in Texas had an epic winter storm. You guys were like 8 inches of snow in San Antonio. My family's got snow. Dogs going crazy. I love that. We missed folks from California, Vermont, Pennsylvania. This is great. West Virginia, Queens. All right. Represent New York. So great. Well, glad y'all could join us. Indiana, Ohio, come on. So I'm excited to be with y'all. So let's pray and jump right into this. Hell froze over. That was a comment. I don't use those bad words like hell. Wait, I just did. We'll pray. King Jesus, we love you. And we thank you, living God, that you are full, God, of life. God, and that in the midst of the times that we can't see, that we don't know, we don't see what you're doing and where you're leading us, we know for sure that you are present and you are leading. And we thank you, God, that as we pursue your scriptures, I ask for a spirit of wisdom and revelation to come upon all of us, God, so that we can understand and rightly discern the height, the width, the depth, the breadth of the love of God that's revealed through Jesus Christ, the Son. That you would root us and ground us in your love, that you would fill us with your truth and your power, that we would live empowered with grace and life in this day and age. We thank you, God, that what you've done before, you will do again. And we're asking you, God, for a deliverance again in our nation, the United States of America, and the nations of this earth, God, that are feeling the shakings and the encroaching darkness, but also the breaking out of the power and life of the living God, not the God of the Christian religion necessarily, but the God who is alive. And we thank you, God, that you are present, God, with us. And we bless you, Jesus. In your precious name I pray. Amen. Well, I need to caveat my prayer. I just said, not necessarily the God of the Christian religion. I want to explain what I meant by that. Maybe I shouldn't have said it. But what I was thinking in my head when I said that is that the God that we serve is not just a religious God. We're not following human tradition that sometimes Christianity and other religious traditions get sucked into just cultural religious tradition. I am a Christian. I believe in Christianity through and through, Orthodox Christian. But what God is doing is not necessarily in a Christian religious system. He's breaking out into the world. So I do think the Christian God is the same God I pray to, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, the living one. So anyway, there's my caveat for the awkward thing I prayed to start the show. So, all right, so let's go back here. The power of adoption. So this is session number 2 in an 8-session study that we're going to be doing leading up to Holy Week. I'll do the last one on Monday. That will be, I think, Palm Sunday on Sunday, and then the last one will be Monday. We'll do the wandering on that day, and we'll talk about God's heart. So we'll be doing this next couple of weeks. But today we're talking about Moses. So there's 3 parts to each of these studies. The first part is scripture. The second part is we look at history and archaeology. And then the third part, we usually go in and we look at Google Earth. So I show you the places where all of these things have gone on. Tonight, there's not a big Google Earth. We are a little delayed, so I'm going to move pretty quickly through this, but it is a mouthful. So one caveat, and then we'll get into the presentation. I'm going to be showing you a lot of ancient Egyptian history that's rooted in what's called the 18th dynasty Thutmoside succession. It's a mouthful. Makes me feel smart. But the 19th dynasty of the Pharaohs, was the Ramses dynasty. And this is the dynasty that many people, the pharaohs that most people are familiar with. But the one that preceded the 19th dynasty was the 18th dynasty. That is the era of the pharaohs that, according to the internal date lines of the Exodus, were the dynastic rule in Egypt during the time of the Exodus. So again, as all things ancient history and Bible, there is a wide variety of ideas and opinions, and a lot of interesting research about a 13th century dating for the Exodus, and having Ramses and the 19th dynasty of Egypt be the pharaoh of the Exodus. So I'm not pushing my pet archaeological theory. What I'm doing is presenting you one theory that I think has a lot of interesting facts to it, or interesting data points to it. But most importantly, what this study is doing is rooting you in the scriptures. You're getting a sense of the ideas that are embedded in the Hebrew scriptures, who the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is, and what is his message for us today. So hold that lightly. There's competing narratives about whether or not the Exodus happened at this time. I'm showing you one version, but I am revealing to you, as best I understand it, the God who wrote the scriptures, who's alive and present in our lives. So that's it for disclaimers. The power of adoption. We're going to begin here with Exodus 1 through 7. We're going to read these words, and I want to tell the story about Moses and pick up these details, because tonight in particular, it's very, very geopolitical. So y'all, I'm going to ask you to begin thinking through these scriptures in the light of, well, how, like, the Pharaoh's not just a character. Like, he was the leader of the it wasn't a free world, the leader of the enslaved world. He was the leader of this empire. And this was the feared empire, and they did some crazy things. So we're going to read through that. And I do think there are also, because I'm on my own Facebook page, and I don't have to worry about C3 regulations, I'm going to tell you what I think, because I think there's some very interesting connections here between this story and a current moment in time. So let's read this here. Exodus 1 through 7. Now, these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man in his household came with Jacob, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All of those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all of his brothers, and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. All right, so we read the names of all of these tribe members because it's an important part of the establishing of the nation. And I won't squirrel away on the tribes and the lost tribes and the 10, 12 tribes and that whole deal. But we know that they all came in. They lived with Joseph. The scriptures say that Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation. So this is like the founding fathers of the Hebrews, the Jewish people. They all passed away in Egypt. The founders' lives came to an end. But when that happened, they all grew exceedingly abundantly and multiplied. And they grew mighty, and the land was filled with them. That's key to understanding the timeline in Egypt. We saw, if you were with us for the first study, the timeline, that they were in Egypt for about 260 years. And a good chunk of that, 70 or so, they lived off the fat of the land. And they grew mighty. So, Exodus 1, 10 through 8. 1, 8 through 10. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply and it happen in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. All right, y'all, this is key. Okay, this is the key for why Pharaoh does what he does, because he is scared that the Semitic peoples that have lived and grown exceedingly mighty and fruitful in his land are going to overtake his own native people and ultimately overthrow his power structure. This is an insecure Pharaoh that understands the dynamics of immigration into his land. And so he wants to repress them, and he's forgotten the things of Joseph. So that's important. In a couple of weeks, I'll show you some numbering of the multiplication that really fleshes this out a little bit further. So we go on, verse 11, Exodus 1. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they, the Egyptians, afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And the Egyptians, they were in dread of the children of Israel. And so the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them was with rigor. So the solution to the problem with immigration for the government that didn't like the people that were multiplying and numerous, that had made the nation great and saved the nation and been elevated by previous rulers, the people that were multiplying and were great and mighty in the land, the first thing that Pharaoh did to make life hard for them was he started messing with their economy. That he said they made them serve with rigor. He began to mess with their work. He began to make it very difficult for them to get a job, to earn a wage. And then we see that that progressed from beginning to control the economic constraints on the people. He began then to force them into doing more with less. And I think that this is an interesting point, and it's one that governments and leadership has done historically throughout the generations. If you want to encourage people, if you want to hold people in bondage in your nation, the first thing you have to do is discourage them in their economic pursuits. You've got to make work hard for them. It's almost like the first thing you needed to do to begin to repress a huge population of people that you were afraid were going to take over your power, that was being secretly exposed in front of a watching world, then you would need to maybe shut down the nation and require that everybody stay shut in and make it very difficult for small businesses to remain open under threat of government mandated restrictions and jail time. Like maybe if you were a Pharaoh and you wanted to keep people from uniting against you, you shut down their economy and threatened them with a global pandemic. I don't know. That would be too much. People wouldn't do that. But that's what Pharaoh did. So he made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick. So I'm not saying that Egypt launched a bioweapon engineered in China against the Jewish people. I'm just saying that that's a crazy thing to do. So Exodus 1:15 through 18. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Sipporah and the other was Puah. I think that's right. Maybe not. Verse 16. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, see them on the birth stools. If it's a son, then you shall kill him. If it's a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them. But they saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? Okay, so the first thing is that Pharaoh, to repress the people he's afraid are going to rise up and take from him his power, the first thing he does is that he hurts the economy and makes the job market He crashes the job market essentially for the Hebrews that are there. Crashes it. And then that doesn't really work because they continue to work hard and they continue to produce and they continue to multiply. It's like all the attempts that Pharaoh did to shut down the work of these people didn't work. So what does he do? Well, he institutes nationalized abortion. Targeted nationalized abortion. They probably even had to pay for it with their own tax dollars, those Hebrews. So he now says, all right, go, and if you see them on the birth stools, if it's a son. So this is partial birth selective abortion. This is exactly what it is. On the birth stools, if you see that it's a son, kill it. Okay? Well, does that work? Well, work. In one capacity, it does work. It kills a generation of young men. But it doesn't stop the Hebrews from multiplying. It doesn't stop what God is doing. So when abortion doesn't work, he gets angry and he calls these midwives in. And this is the response of the midwives. Why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? So they respond. The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. I love that phrase. You know, why have you done this evil thing? Well, the Hebrews are better than Egyptian women. They're not like us anyway. They give birth fast. We can't get there in time. I love that. I love that statement. I don't know if that's true, but I love that he was afraid of the Hebrews rising up in his nation, so he does selective partial birth abortion, national selective partial birth abortion on them. And then the people that he told to do it were like, confirmed his fears. Oh, these people, they're actually better than us. They give birth too fast. But verse 20, therefore God dealt well with the midwives. And the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that he provided households for them. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. All right, so selective national partial birth abortion doesn't work. What do we move to next? Infanticide, right? Just straight up kill the children. Maybe even pass a bill in one of our northeastern states that says that even if a child is born alive, you don't have to save it. This is, for some reason, the pharaohs of this earth have always hated infants, and particularly infants in a generation where there's a deliverer coming. So let's go on. I'm not going to rail about this. And a man of the house of Levi went and took as wife daughter of Levi. So this is key. Moses was full Levite, okay? Big deal. So the woman conceived and bore a son, but when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, and put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank, by the boundary marker of the river. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done with him. Okay, so this is where we need to let go of our Disney version of Moses in the little water being pushed out into the world. Okay, what they're doing here is they put him in this basket. I'll show you a picture of the basket in a bit. But they put him in a basket and they go and they place him in amongst the reeds at the boundary of the river. Okay, and then they hang out and they watch to see what happens. Okay. I'll show you why in just a second. So they don't stick him in the Nile, kick him out for the gators, and watch him float down the middle of the Nile River through the rapids. That's not what the scriptures say. It says that they take him and they laid it in the reeds on the bank of the river. And his sister stood off to know what would be done with him. Okay? Why? Let's look at this. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, strategically placed right near where the Pharaoh was bathing. And her maidens walked along the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, Moses' sister, standing there, right, comes out of the shadows, and says, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" So this is a total setup, y'all. Total setup. They take the baby, they place it in the pool. Now, the way this worked, Pharaoh's daughter, they had all throughout time and even today, up until this day, the wealthy people live on water. Water has a more desirable view. Real estate's more expensive and better on water. So Pharaohs built their house on water, and they were on the Nile River, and they didn't have showers and whatnot. So they made these edges, like the river would be flowing along, right, like this, and Pharaoh's house is up here. So they come in and they carve out a section of the river in, and they make a protected bank where they line the bank with stones, and they make a private pool for the Pharaoh's daughter to bathe. So the picture that emerges here is that Moses' sister, probably under the direction of mom and dad, they go and they take this baby and they place it strategically in the bathing pond of Pharaoh's daughter on purpose. This is what I think is going on here. It makes more sense than just kicking him out into the Nile. Well, why are they doing this? This is the intrigue. How did they concoct this plan for them to just take the baby Moses, the sweet little tiny baby Moses, and put him in a basket and basically give him to Pharaoh's daughter? Why did they do that? And how did Pharaoh's daughter know that he was a Hebrew? I mean, we're all adults here on Facebook, I guess. How'd they know, right? Well, he was a baby, and there was the covenant of circumcision. This was a very well-known problem in the days of Jesus. It's why the people, the Orthodox rabbis were in battles with the Herodians, because they didn't want their children to be part of the Greco-Roman gymnasium culture where they wrestled naked and did all this stuff. It was a big issue. So Pharaoh's daughter knows immediately that this little baby is a Hebrew. Now, why does she take the child into her house? What was she thinking? She had to have known immediately that this was one of her dad's mortal enemies. Her dad had nationalized selective partial birth abortion and infanticide, ultimately genocide, running against these particular people. And she thought, I'll take him in, save him, put him in my house, call him my own. That's a good idea. I want to know, why was that a good idea? What's going on here? That's the subject of tonight's study. So, Pharaoh's daughter says to Moses' sister, "Go." So the maiden went and called the child's mother and said, "Take him away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." This was a common practice for adopted children, for wet nurses. So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, and she called his name Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." Moses is Moshe, and it means to draw out, okay? To draw out. So now it comes to pass, in those days, Moses was grown. We're going to look at the geopolitical and the conspiratorial elements of why this all happened, and it's awesome. So we'll keep going, though. I'm trying to move. And he saw let's go, verse 11. Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And so he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting, and he said to the one who did the wrong, "Why were you striking your companion?" Then he said, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" So Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Okay, so Moses grows up, and he was in Pharaoh's house. And for a particular reason, Pharaoh's daughter adopted Moses into his house. Pharaoh adopts the enemy that he's systematically exterminating into his own house to raise him as his own son. My hypotheses on why they did this was a very common tool in the ancient world and even in, the early modern days. It still goes on today. Marriage and adoption were means by which two opposing rulers could join houses, right? The French and the Spanish and the English, there was constant stuff like this going on. The Portuguese, this was a big tactic for a long time in the West and even in the East, to marry in or to adopt in someone that is part of a class or a group that you're threatened by to create a homogeneous nation, right? Unity through marriage. So what we think was going on here was that Pharaoh saw an opportunity to adopt in a ruler, but why would Pharaoh bring in a Hebrew boy and raise him in his own house as the son of his daughter? Basically an heir to his throne. Why would he do that? What about his other sons who are supposed to be Pharaoh? Wouldn't he feel threatened? Wouldn't they feel threatened? Well, this is the idea that this particular Pharaoh probably didn't have an heir. What if this Pharaoh didn't have a son? What if all he had was a daughter? And the daughter can't be Pharaoh, can't rule Egypt. So they see an enemy child. They decide, let's adopt in this enemy child. Let's bring him into our house. Let's raise him as our own. And then at some point, if the Hebrew people ever try and rebel, we're going to have someone that is a Hebrew that can lead them to follow what Egypt says. Y'all, this is so much intrigue. And I'm going to pause here. I went to a prayer assembly with Pray Georgia and some friends, Lynn and Ed Alderson and some other cool folks. And they asked me to share a word, and I didn't know that I had a word to share, but they asked me to share. And so I started sharing this because I was thinking about it. And this realization came as I was sharing it. Like, what Pharaoh did in this moment was that he brought in a Hebrew to raise him in the ways and the rulership and the means of Pharaoh's house, to get him to influence the people that he was scared of. Y'all, this is a tactic of the enemy. This is a tactic of nation-building kingdoms. This has been a tactic that has intentionally been done in the United States of America for certain groups of people to get pastors, to fund pastors, to teach them their particular ideology, their political ideology, to say, hey, you're a pastor, you're good, come with us. We'll teach you all about social justice and critical race theory, and we'll fund you, and we'll fund a whole progressive movement of Christians that deny the reality of marriage between a man and a woman, that deny other kinds of orthodox realities that have been this way for thousands of years. But they they adopt a pastor as their own, fund them, raise them in their own house to help repress a movement that they're afraid of. Y'all, I think this has been going on, and I don't know if I'll get kicked off of Facebook for this, but I think this is going on in big time ways. I think it's one of the things that's happening inside the so-called progressive Christian movement, is that there are political ideologies that have been funded and planted there to keep the majority of Orthodox believers from rising up and throwing off the shackles and rejecting the fact that we are supposed to stay silent and submissive to our technocratic and political overlords about what we hold as true and valuable and life-giving, right? And as a believer in Jesus, I'm a white upper middle class man in America who has all of these privileges and all of these intersectional strikes against me because I just live with my unaware white privilege, but I'm supposed to feel afraid or ashamed of the fact that God has come and said for thousands of years that life is life, that truth is truth, and that we are not supposed to just believe all of the things that they're starting to feed us to believe. I'm going on a rant here now, but I'm gonna pull back. Hopefully you guys can see the interesting and maybe eerie similarities between what Pharaoh was doing and what continues to happen to this day. This is a very well-known and very familiar story. And I'm not going to apologize for the fact that I believe that a traditional reading of the scripture is true. And I am not against other readings of scripture, and I am not against equality of opportunity for people. But I am against equality of outcome, mandated equality of outcome, and compelled speech. And this is what starts to happen in leftist, fascist, totalitarian governments. They begin to rent their evangelicals, fund them, bring them into their own houses, get them to push their own social gospels, and that ultimately undermines and denies the truth of the scriptures. And this is what Pharaoh was doing with Moses, trying to get him to become one of his own. But God. Okay? But God. Watch this. Oh, we were already there. That was a big pause, but we already got there. I'm going to go back. So, but God had another plan. This is the scandal of the moment, because Moses identifies with his own people. The one that was supposed to be Pharaoh's trump card, the one to get the Hebrews to stay quiet, stay submitted, follow him, the one that they poured all this money and time into and all this political power, identified with his own people. He threw off the shackles of the adopted family and the system that was pulling him in and said, nope, I'm identifying with my people. And when he rose up and killed an Egyptian, Pharaoh realized, oh no, everything that we've done up until this point is broken. It doesn't work anymore. The one that was supposed to be the one that led the movement to repress the ones we're afraid of has identified with them, and he's trying to liberate them. This was a major problem. Okay? But this may be a word for us now. When Moses decided that he was going to liberate his people, what did he do? Did he have a prayer vigil? Did he, change.org, write a petition to the White House? No, he didn't go and build coalitions. He didn't go and ask God how to deliver his people. He didn't go and pray or pursue anything. He was a Pharaoh's son. And so he identified with his people, but the worldview that he had was a pharaonic Egyptian one. So how did Moses try and liberate the people? He murdered. He killed somebody. And then he looked at them and he came back, and Acts 7 says this, that Moses expected that they would follow him, and they looked at him and said, who made you ruler and judge over us? So y'all, here's the moral of this little story, and then I'm going to move on. If you identify with a class of people, your people that are being enslaved, and you want to liberate them, you cannot liberate an enslaved group of people using the same means by which they are enslaved. Okay? I'll say that again. You can't liberate people from slavery using the means by which they are enslaved. How did Egypt enslave the Hebrews? How does anybody enslave another person? Fear of death. It's the threat of death. Bodily death, relational death, economic death, reputation, death of reputation. This is what the Twitter flash mobs and all of this doxing is all about. We are going to kill you. We're going to kill your career. We're going to kill your jobs. We're going to kill your influence. We're going to stand outside and threaten you. This is how the world system holds people in bondage, the fear of death. And the fear of death is worse than death itself. But Hebrews says that Jesus took from the devil, who had the keys of death, and he freed those who all their lives have been enslaved by the fear of death. So I want to say this very clearly, because it needs to be said. I am not an advocate for violent overthrow of government. I am not an advocate for a violent revolution. I'm not an advocate for using murder, either literal, of course not literal, not an advocate at all of that, but I'm not an advocate of using murderous words or murderous character assassinations. I'm not an advocate of using the same means to liberate people by which they are enslaved. And Moses, when he tried that, it was a huge disastrous failure. And God drove him into the wilderness for 40 years to learn another way. And church, believers in Jesus, I don't want to wander 40 years. I believe we have an opportunity in America right now to know and apply the ways of the kingdom of God so that we can liberate a nation, so that we can deliver the truth of God to our culture in a way that transforms it. But we can't use murder. We can't use slander. We can't use hatred. We can't use violent words or violent speech. And if they accuse us of using violent speech because we affirm that marriage is between a man and a woman, well, that's another story. But I hope y'all are picking that up. So Moses goes, he sits down in a well in Midian. The priest of Midian comes, he gets his daughter, he marries her. I'm going to skip through this. Moses then, verse 20, he lives with the man, he has a son, and he calls him Geshurim, which means he's been a stranger in a foreign land. Now, last verse. It happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Okay, this is the king that was the Pharaoh when Moses left. Okay, so after the Pharaoh that raised Moses in his house dies, this happens. Verse 23, now it happened in the process of time, the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. All right, that word cry is the Hebrew word za'akah. It is the word, it means, it's not just like a, oh, ow, or some little cry. It's like a deep, guttural, yearning cry. It's a za'akah. A cry out. And every time in the scripture, well, nearly every time in the scripture, if you do a word study on this, nearly every time you see the word za'akah, that triggers the covenant-keeping God to come and deliver his people according to his covenant promise. The cry of the people reaches the covenant-keeping God, and the covenant-keeping God comes to keep his promises. So this is where Moses is. The covenant God comes to say, I am going to set the people free. And he begins to talk to Moses about this. And we're going to pick up the story about what God says and Moses' encounters. Next week, we'll look at all of the plagues that come to Egypt. But this week, I want to pick up and start talking with you a little bit about Moses in Egyptian history. So let's take a look at Moses and Egyptian history. I'm going to take a drink here. All right. So we're going to get into some history here now. And what this is about is, the basic idea is, if Moses was who he said he was, then wouldn't he have shown up in Egyptian history? Okay. This again is concept. I'm going to give you actual facts from Egyptian history, but I'm going to tie them together in a non-orthodox way, okay? And I want to be just straight up front on that. The facts that I'm giving you are actual, accurate Egyptian historical things that you can go and verify. The story of who these people are, that is something that I'm putting together according to sources, the Exodus case from Leonard Moeller and other research that I've done on my own, all right? So in order to do this, we are going to look at the succession of pharaohs from the end of the 18th dynasty. Okay, this is the very complicated Thutmoside dynasty. Thutmoside dynasty and the transition of power from one pharaoh to the next. And so the basic idea here in this study is that according to Egyptian history, there is a pharaoh, and he lives in Thebes. That was the primary city up here. Pharaoh lived in Thebes, but then there was a co-regent, usually the son. The firstborn son of Pharaoh was sort of like Pharaoh Light, or the vice president, or the co-regent, the one that was in training. And they lived in one of the newer capitals that was being built up called Memphis during this period of time. So the idea that this is all predicated on is that the pharaohs transitioned their power from Thebes to the co-regent in Memphis upon their death. And this is what I'm talking about. During the days of Moses, there was, well, we'll pick up the 18th dynasty succession here with Moshe and Thutmoses I. These are both historical characters. And Moshe was the pharaoh in Thebes. And his name comes from the word Amen, which is Ra, and that's the highest, most important god. So the etymology of his name, like Caesar or POTUS, these are not the names that their parents gave them. These are the names of, the titles, right? So Moshe is Amen equals Ra, and what's Moshe? Drawn out. Okay, so the Pharaoh was drawn out of Ra. Okay, that's how they named him. Thutmoses I, Moshe, thought the lesser god. So he was also a god, but he wasn't as high up on the pantheon. So the co-regent was drawn out of thought, the lesser god. Okay, so this is the idea of how in the 18th dynasty, the pharaohs named themselves. Like Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, all of these Caesars, those weren't their real names. Those were adopted names and titles. Augustus means August one, illuminated. He was also called Father of the Nation and Son of God. So these are not their literal names. So something that's interesting about Thutmoses I is that in history, Thutmoses I has a character. Some say it's his daughter. Some say it's a concubine. Some say it's a different kind of a person. But in Egyptian history, there is this character named Nefer. And Nefer is also often confused and connected to a particular woman named Hatshepsut. And in Egyptian history, Hatshepsut is a very famous name. She is, you can get some National Geographic articles about her. Google Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh, the female king of Egypt. So she was wildly important and wildly powerful and well known in Egyptian history. And we're going to talk about her life and who she was. She was the daughter of a pharaoh that didn't have a son. And she effectively was the ruler of Egypt, but that was a big scandal because you couldn't be a woman and rule the country. So this is the way the progression works. So when Moshe dies, Thutmoses I becomes Amenhotep I, and Amenhotep's the first daughter was Hatshepsut. So again, Moshe, drawn out of Ra, Amenhotep, son of Ra the first. So they become drawn out of the lesser god to become Amenhotep. This is how these titles progress from regent to now pharaoh. And then here is the scandal, is that Hatshepsut is supposed to be Hatshepsut is the only child of Amenhotep, and she's a woman and she can't actually be king. So we have this other character in history named Senmut. And I'm going to talk to you about Senmut. This is a little confusing, but I promise you I'll wrap it up together. Senmut is a character that is connected to Nefer and Hatshepsut. And the historians and Egyptologists don't know exactly how to connect all these characters together. You know, there's lots of different theories. The theory I'm going to give you is not the orthodox one, but it makes a whole lot of sense. But first we have to understand who this character Senmut is. So let's look at the historical origins of the name Senmut. Senmut means my mother's brother, okay? And this is what's called the royal narrative of Egypt. Okay, this is the story. This is like the founding myth or narrative of the Egyptian, the highest gods in Egypt. And it begins with a guy named Osiris. And Osiris marries Isis. And so this is one of the high gods. He's the king of the underworld, and Isis is a very famous goddess in Egyptian history. So Osiris marries Isis, but there's something interesting about this coupling. They're brother and sister. Okay? So brother marries his sister. So what happens when brother marries sister, though, is that Osiris is attacked. According to Egyptian history, Cyrus is attacked by a god named Set, who comes and executes the judgment of Ra on him, and he hacks Osiris's body to pieces, and he scatters his limbs all throughout the underworld. Whoops, wrong one. There we go. He scatters his pieces all throughout the underworld, Osiris, and dismembers him, literally. But, this is history, right? But there is a portion of Osiris's body that gets found, and it is his male part. It is his phallus. And so that phallus then is used, this is part of their story, it's either used post-mortem or it happened beforehand, but after Osiris dies and the phallus is discovered, then Isis gives birth to someone else, the son named Horus. And Horus was seen as the reincarnation of his father, and he gets put in the reincarnational place for his father in the natural. So Horus becomes his father, Osiris, so he takes the spot of his brother marrying his sister, or a son marrying his mother. Paging Dr. Freud. So the son marries the mother, and that's how you get Horus that becomes my mother's brother. He's both a brother and he's a mother. Okay? And incidentally, to remember Isis and the phallus that was lost, that gave life to Horus, who became a reincarnation, they erected obelisks all throughout Egypt. And so anytime you see that beautiful, tall, slender obelisk of ancient Egyptian origin, then you can remember the Osiris story when he lost his male part and his phallus was found and it reincarnated his wife's son, who became his wife's mother, who became his son's wife's mother. This is weird, right? It's even weird for Arkansas, y'all. This is Egyptian history. So enjoy your next trip to the Washington Monument. So, Senmut in history is this. So here's an idea. Thutmose, this is Orthodox religion or Orthodox Egyptology now. Thutmose I gave birth to Hatshepsut. That was his daughter. Okay? So he gives birth to Hatshepsut. Now, in Egyptian history, there is the character Senmut. And what I think happened is that Hatshepsut adopted Senmut. And this is an image of Senmut and Nefer, and I'll explain that relationship to you. So Hatshepsut and Senmut were intimately connected all the days of her life. And I believe it was an adoption. So Hatshepsut adopts Senmut. And then, maybe because Hatshepsut, obviously, she was the only daughter of Thutmose I. And he couldn't have a male son. And she couldn't be the ruler. So why would she not adopt a male son, bring him into her house, and basically have him be the king with her ruling as the vassal queen? Okay, that's not the Orthodox reading of the Egyptology, but it makes really good sense, because in order to legitimize this adopted child, Senmut, that just shows up, and I'll tell you a lot about Senmut, in order to do that, they had to follow the royal narrative of Egypt. So the royal narrative of Egypt says that, well, The daughter gave birth to the son of the father, and the son was the reincarnation of the father, just like Osiris. So they named him Senmut, which means the son marries his brother, or my mother's brother. So what they're doing with Senmut and Hatshepsut in their relationship, they are mirroring the Egyptian Orthodox royal narrative to validate an adopted son in the house of Pharaoh to place him up into power. Okay? I'm just seeing a comment. You're going to have to watch this again to wrap your mind around it. This is a mind dump, okay? I've been studying this for years, and it took a long time to condense it. So please go back and watch. Basically, what I'm saying to you is that Senmut in history, I believe, I'm making the case based on his name and the royal narrative and the relationship with Hatshepsut. I believe that child, Senmut, was actually adopted sometime around 1526 BC as Moses. And this fits the royal narrative perfectly. That this daughter, Hatshepsut, is the daughter of a king that doesn't have a son, and they adopt this child, they name him Senmut to validate him as the incarnation of his father, according to the royal narrative, and they name him Senmut. Okay? Now here's some more evidence. All right, so I want to talk to you. It's getting hot in my office. Getting sweaty. Okay, could have done without that. So I'm going to give you Orthodox Egyptian history for Senmut. This is from a guy, J. Tidesley, and he wrote a great book, Hatshepsut, the Female Pharaoh. And this is the guy that like glorifies all of amazing things that Hatshepsut did. Seriously, go and read about Hatshepsut. It's some beautiful carvings and interesting life, right? But we're going to use on the left side of your screen here, or the right side, I don't know how it works out. But Senmut, these are direct quotes from a world-famous Egyptologist. And then, taking off my sock. And then we're going to look at what the scripture says about Moses to see if there's any correlations between who Senmut was in history and who Moses is in the Bible. Y'all with me? Nod your heads. All right, good. So, Senmut. According to J. Tidesley, he was the son of humble parents. These are data points. Well, Moses, son of Hebrew slaves. That makes sense. Senmut. Unfortunately, we have no means of knowing when Senmut had started his illustrious royal career. All of these are direct quotes out of this book. Okay? They don't know when Senmut came to power. They don't know when he started. They know that he did have power, but not when. Well, this would make total sense because Moses was found in the Nile River amongst the reeds at the age of 3 by a royal princess. We just talked about that. Okay? That's a pretty interesting connection. These are images I took of Hatshepsut in the Met in New York. Beautiful statues, man. Statues. Senmut rose rapidly through the ranks. Well, if you were heir to a throne, even being born a slave, that's a pretty rapid climb. Senmut. Now, he took the calculated decision to link his future totally with that of Hatshepsut. Okay? So this is one of the great stories of Senmut, of why his entire career was linked, inextricably linked to Hatshepsut. He had amazing reach and authority in history, but he was always connected to Hatshepsut. Why? Well, if you're born alien in the foreign land, you're part of the oppressed class to fit into this narrative, to be the one that they take and use to help keep the powerful people enslaved. You've got to stay linked to Hatshepsut. So everything that Egyptians, the Pharaoh and the Egyptian system were doing was building up Senmut to be inextricably linked to Hatshepsut so that she could be the mother of the ruler. She could really be ruling, but his career was so deeply entwined. This makes total sense from an Egyptian geopolitical history lesson. So, Senmut. Effectively, Senmut was ruler of Egypt. Okay? Ruler of Egypt. Well, the Bible doesn't explicitly say, but he was in line to be ruler, and he was co-ruler in Memphis, we believe, according to before his escape. The Bible doesn't specifically annotate what position Moses had, but based on the scandal of him killing someone and Pharaoh being enraged, like if it was just some slave, like you wrecked daddy's car and you've got a whole fleet of Lamborghinis, it's like no big deal, right? You're my son, yeah, Moses, oy vey. No, this was a scandal, okay? The discovery of the shared tomb of Senmut's parents confirms he was not of particularly high birth. So this image right here are the sarcophagi of Senmut's parents. So this is also images that I took from the Met. So again, Moses was born a slave. Okay, that fits. Here is a picture of Senmut and Nefer. I'll talk to you about them in a sec. Nor is there any evidence to suggest that Senmut ever married. Okay, which was weird for an Egyptian ruler of that kind of level. Well, Moses wasn't married in Egypt. He got married to Jethro's daughter around 40 when he's at the well. I'm seeing some comments about Pharaoh born to Moses as an illegitimate one. Stick with me. I'm going to explain that to you. Indicating that Senmut was in royal service during the reign of Thutmoses I. So the history in Egypt is Senmut was in the reign of Thutmoses. The Bible doesn't tell us that, but it does fit according to the timeline of this study. A couple more pieces of evidence here. These are bricks from the 18th dynasty in Egypt. Straw bricks. These were the things that the Hebrews were making with their feet. Another picture I took from the Met. Here's where it gets interesting. According to J. Tidesley, again, these are direct quotes, Senmut was instantly stripped of all of his privileges and disappeared in mystery circumstances. Well, this makes sense because at the age of 40, Moses escaped with his life to Midian because he killed an Egyptian and identified. We talked about this. This is where it gets really interesting, y'all. Senmut had all of these things and all of this relationship, and then suddenly he just disappears in mystery circumstances in Egypt. Just disappears. So, what's surprising was that Senmut was able to acquire any form of hard stone sarcophagus. This is a picture I took at the Met. I'm proud of this work. I went on like a treasure hunt 10 years ago, all around trying to get photos of these artifacts. But this is a brown quartzite sarcophagus that Senmut was in. And this brown quartzite was reserved for royalty. So it kind of amazes them that they didn't know when he came to power. He wasn't really the ruler, but he was effectively the ruler. But he didn't have that great of a tomb for his parents. So he was lowborn, but he had a brown quartzite sarcophagus, but he was disappeared in mystery circumstances. Like all these things don't make sense. This is a big mystery for Egyptologists. Well, for us, it's clear, right? He was part of the royal family. It was to be expected if he was Moses. But Senmut's tomb was substantially complete when all building work ceased. So this is what happens in Egypt is as soon as you become Pharaoh, they start building you a tomb because the tomb is the delivery vehicle to the afterlife. That's what Khufu's big pyramid is in Giza. It's a giant delivery system from the main central piece in the tomb in Giza, the main burial chamber. There is a thin line of open that goes straight up into a spot in the sky that never orbits a star. A star never orbits into that spot. And they believed that that was the spot, the Egyptians believed that that was the spot that the soul escaped this world and went into the afterlife. And so they built this massive tomb with a little tiny chute that goes straight up into the hole in the sky where there's no stars in orbit. That's a delivery vehicle for the Pharaoh's soul. The Egyptians are fascinating. Well, in history anyway. So, but they built Senmut's tomb and then it just stopped, right? They build him this amazing thing, but then all of a sudden it stops. Well, Moses escaped the country and betrayed the Egyptian court. That makes sense to us. These are pictures of Nefer and Senmut, okay? And what they say here in history is that this is Senmut, the boy Senmut, and the girl Nefer, okay? boy, girl. All right. This is a trowel. And this is the pharaonic braid that indicates for children that they are a pharaoh in training. That Disney did get right in the Disney movie. I forget the name. King of the Desert or whatever. Prince of Egypt, I think. So what's surprising for them is that 25 stone statues of Senmut have survived. Oh, wrong one. 25 hard stone statues of Senmut have survived the ravages of time. This is an extraordinarily large number for statues for a private individual. Again, Moses was heir to the throne. He was not a private individual. Senmut has a high bridge nose and an aquiline nose. And I mean this out of all respect to our Jewish brothers and sisters. The author that wrote this said that this was sometimes offensive. I don't mean it to be offensive. It's a genetic trait of the Hebrew people that aquiline nose character is common, while in genetics in Egypt, it's basically absent. And these are some interesting carvings of a variety of different pharaohs. Okay, this is Thutmose IV, that bust right there, and a handful, I don't remember which pharaohs these all were. But these are Egyptian carvings, right? Egyptian leaders. Here are 3 surviving images of Senmut. It's 1, 2, and 3. So these are pictures of Senmut. And he definitely has non-Egyptian facial features. So is this a carving, a rock carving of Moses in Egypt? I don't know. It's a crazy idea. But what it is. All right, a couple more and then we'll move on to some more. You guys doing okay? This is long. I'm getting hot. Man, I still got about 320 some people with me. You guys are awesome. All right, we'll keep going then. Senmut. His unused tombs were desecrated, his monuments were vandalized, and his reliefs and statues were defaced in an attempt to erase both name and memory of Senmut from Egyptian history. This is a direct quote from the Egyptian historian. Senmut, something happened. And he erupted, his career erupted in scandal. And they vandalized his reliefs and they tried to erase him from Egyptian history. But we know exactly what it is, right? His tomb is empty because Moses dies in today's Jordan, right? Going into the promised land. And it's certain that they would have desecrated his tombs because of the great betrayal of the Egyptian court, right? This was a massive, massive problem. So I find this incredibly interesting. And it's some pretty compelling evidence. One piece of the puzzle. But let's move on with our timeline. And let me tell you, that's just the beginning of the Thutmose dynasty. Quite the family. It's the modern family. So let's take a look here. Moses to Senmut. So about 1526 BC approximately, according to our timeline that we developed and I showed you guys last week. Moses gets adopted. And maybe around 33 years old, we don't know this for sure, but Thutmose becomes Amenhotep I. Nefer, we believe, becomes Hatshepsut, and Senmut gets given the name Thutmose II. Now, these are my assumptions that are based on the naming component here of who Nefer and Senmut were. They don't really know that relationship, historians don't. But it would make sense that Thutmose has a daughter that adopts Senmut, and when his dad dies, when Amoshe dies, Thutmose becomes the pharaoh, and they begin to instill the genealogical plan. Right? They hatch this plan when they're young, and then they give them the new names, and they give them the new titles, and these things begin to happen. That's the hypotheses. I just want to show you a couple of pictures. This is the Valley of the Kings. Not a great photo. Where all of this stuff takes place in Egypt. I didn't redo this slide since I built it 10 years ago. That's a Google Earth look at the Valley of the Kings. Sometimes I'll take you into Google Earth. We don't really have time for that. This is a scarab, and you'll see Horus there, and this is connected to, the scarab is a little beetle in the middle and the Horus on either side. This is connected to Senmut. Why? Why is Horus connected to Senmut? Well, it's the same story. It's the same narrative. Here's another image of Horus that was connected to Senmut's tomb. So inside of Senmut's tomb, Horus was an important god for his royal structure because it mirrors the royal narrative, what they tried to do with him. Oh, this is the Met. Hatshepsut there in the middle. She's given an image of a sphinx. But I really love these statues. I mean, there's just some incredible work of Hatshepsut. Beautiful work. Here is Senmut's tomb, the brown quartzite, interior of the brown quartzite. Here's the exterior shot that I showed you. Now here is Senmut and Nefer in Egyptian history. And there's a lot of these drawings, a lot of these carvings. And they say that this is Senmut and this is Nefer. This is what they said. And so based on that, I don't have a whole lot of credibility. They don't have a whole lot of credibility typically for me, because this is pretty clearly obviously this is a woman, Nefer, with the male child, Senmut, who has the trowel and the pharaonic braid. Here zooms in. So here's the pharaonic braid. It's a single braid, and here's the trowel. Here is a pharaonic headdress, obviously a female. So Egyptian history gets this wrong, it seems, and it makes way more sense if this is a statue of Nefer, who later becomes Hatshepsut, and her adopted son, Senmut, who is going to have rulership authority and become pharaoh one day. That makes total sense. So, our idea here is that at some point, we now know that Senmut has a career. He lives and works in Egypt, but at some point during the reign of Thutmose II and Hatshepsut's life, Senmut disappears. Another guy in the Cairo Museum says, it's probable that Senmut abused his power and that at a particular point in the reign of Hatshepsut, he fell into disgrace, as demonstrated by the damage done to most of his monuments. Again, so we know he went into the wilderness for 40 years. Okay? So let's go into the wilderness here. And where did Moses go? Again, these are old graphics. So this is Memphis, and he goes into the land of Midian. Midian is very well known where Midian was. It was outside of Egypt. So this was the Egyptian boundary, roughly equivalent to the boundary today. Again, there's debates about this. Some people say, no, it wasn't actually. That's not really the boundary. The boundary really is this. Right here, the Suez Canal, although there was no canal in those days. I think it was over here. A good case can be made. There was a massive Egyptian garrison here along the King's Highway that was done in this period. I think the Egyptians had control of the Sinai Peninsula. In any case, Moses, Senmut, flees for his life, and he goes out to the land of Midian. And Midian is a very well-known place. There's tons of stuff written about Midian. It's in today's Saudi Arabia, in a province called Tabuk in northern Saudi Arabia. It butts up against Israel, right down in here. And this is Jordan. And right about here, this is Petra. Okay? So, some beautiful country right there. So, Moses, Senmut, leaves. He runs across. He flees out of Egypt into the land of Midian, into a place today called Albad, Jethro's home. So the Arab peoples there, the Saudis and the local tribesmen and women, they have a place, and I can show you this when we get to it, that there is a spot. They believe that Jethro lived in this cave. It's a long history there. There's a well in Albad that they call Moses' well, and there's great history in this territory about Moses coming to the land of Midian. So he gets out of Egypt, and while he's out of Egypt, more scandal erupts in Egypt. So let's take a look at what the history after Amenhotep I and Thutmose Hatshepsut, what goes on with this crew of people. So if Thutmose II, which was Senmut, renamed for a pharaonic title, that Moses was actually a co-regent in Memphis at the time of his identifying with the people, which would make total sense why Pharaoh wants to kill his vice president after he betrays him. No correlation to current events. Thutmose III has to, you got to find a replacement. Hatshepsut can't be the king. What happened when your vice president betrays you and disappears in mystery circumstances? Well, you got to put somebody else in. So the next person in Egyptian history is this guy, Thutmose III, and he's connected during the reign of Hatshepsut. And he's a co-regent, but he just shows up nowhere in Egyptian history at the age of 22. So if you look at Thutmose III in Egyptian history, he just shows up at 22 years old and begins to reign in this capacity. Well, that would make sense if that was Moses' replacement. So when in the course of human events, Amenhotep dies, then Thutmose III becomes Amenhotep II, and then Amenhotep II has to have a child. I'm not sure. So this Amenhotep II, including the years that he reigned as Thutmose III, and this is Orthodox Egyptology here now. Thutmose III becomes Amenhotep, and he reigned for 32 years, okay, in history, in Egyptian history. So Amenhotep II has a child named Thutmose IV. And Thutmose IV is an interesting person. And I'm going to show you why Thutmose IV is connected to this place. You guys know this? This is the Sphinx. I've never been to Egypt. Maybe someday. At the base of this, there is this stele, or stele, or stela, or I don't even know how you really say it, stele. It's a carving. And on this carving, there is a fine bit of Egyptian propaganda. And this was the favorite. Governments continue to use propaganda to prop up illegitimate rulers that are holding on to thrones and powers illegitimately without some of the normal ways to hold on to power. So here at the Sphinx, there is this carving, and it tells the story of Thutmose IV. So let's read this story. This is what the carving says, translated, because I don't read hieroglyph anymore. I used to know it in elementary school, but I forgot. I didn't use it, didn't speak it, so sorry. One of these days it happened when the king's son Thutmose IV had arrived on his journey about the time of midday and had stretched himself to rest in the shade of this great god, that sleep overtook him. Remember, as we read this, this is Egyptian propaganda to prop up an illegitimate ruler, okay? So this is sort of poem, but it's sort of in this narrative, sort of, I don't know, Gilgamesh style thing. So let's read on. He dreamt, Thutmose IV, in his slumber at the moment when the sun was at its zenith. The sun is Ra, the high god. And it seemed to him as though this great God spoke to him with his own mouth, just as a father speaks to his son. Think about propaganda here now. God is talking as a father to his son, okay? Thutmose IV, propping him up, addressing him thus. He says, "Behold me, look at me, thou my son Thutmose IV. I am your father, Hormaku, Keper, Ra, Tamu. The kingdom shall be given to you, and you shall wear the white crown and the red crown on the throne of the earth god's seed, the youngest among the gods." Propaganda. "The world will be yours in its length and in its breadth, as far as the light of the eye. Plenty and riches will be yours, the best from the interior, rich tributes, long life. My countenance is gracious towards you, and my heart clings to you. I will give you the best of all things. Except you have to accept this task. The sand of the district in which I have my existence has covered me up. Promise me that you will do what I wish in my heart. Then shall I know whether you are my son, my helper. Go forward and let me be united to you. I am. All right, Faith, New York Times, CNN style. Yeah, that's totally, I mean, that's where they learned it, right? All the greatest journalists were ancient Egyptologists. I don't know, making that up. So this is the idea here at the Sphinx. The propaganda in between is that Thutmose IV is getting talked to, and everybody in Egypt is hearing that Thutmose is the son of Ra, that he's the son, and Ra is promising in the kingdom all of the land, all of the wealth, all the riches, all the everything. You are actually my son. Only you have to do one task for me. Okay? Get rid of all the sand. This is the hero's quest, right? The great hero goes on a quest for God and validates who he is. Remove all the sand from me and you will become the full inheritor, right? You don't need propaganda like this for legitimate rulers. You know, if you're an illegitimate ruler, then you've got to prop things up. You got to let things keep in darkness. You got to not allow anybody to ever have access to any of the voting equipment or any of the ballots. You don't ever actually get to see any of the evidence, and you just tell everybody there's no evidence, but you've never given anybody a chance to see the evidence. And when they do show the evidence, you shut them all down off the internet. So this is what the pharaohs did in Egypt. It bears no correlation between our current state. So this is what happened. So all the sand is all around, and then bear my animation skills. I didn't get this done from Marvel Studios. So Thutmose IV takes out all of the sand, and he is now, hooray, he's the ruler of Egypt. He's the one that is legitimate. So, here we go. We've got Thutmose IV, who's got a bunch of propaganda about him being actually Pharaoh. Don't ask questions, y'all. The Sphinx, it's big. It's impressive. There's a story. Pay attention to the story. Don't ask questions. Don't think about facts. Listen to the story. Okay? What a pretty story. It's got to be true. It's the story. Okay? Thutmose IV has the story. So he then, Amenhotep II dies. Thutmose IV becomes Amenhotep III. And what's next? I don't know what's next. I'm going to swipe forward. He reigns for about 8 years. Okay, Amenhotep III. Now, we've been keeping track of this. So down here, let me do this. Cut back. So down here, we've got Moses. Adopted in about 1526 for 40 years. We're guessing around 33 years old here. But during the reign of Thutmose III and Amenhotep, that's one guy. He reigned for 33 years. So Moses is gone. And then Amenhotep goes about 8 years, and now we're up to 1446. So now we have our cast of characters for the great showdown of the Exodus. Because what happens in 1446? Moses comes back to say, let my people go. Let them go. Now, that makes Amenhotep III the Pharaoh at the time of the Exodus. Okay? But Amenhotep's son, then, would be the son that dies in the plague of the firstborn. Okay? Now, so this is our cast of characters and our moment in history. And I always debate whether or not to do it here or do it next week. But since you guys are already asking about it. So the question about Pharaoh at the time of the Exodus. And was he a firstborn son? So according to this narrative here, Thutmose IV has a bunch of propaganda propping him up as the ruler of Egypt. Well, why would he need to be propped up as the ruler of Egypt? Is there something illegitimate about him? And how would we know that? And if he was an illegitimate ruler of Egypt, how would we know And is there a correlation in between the scriptures? Well, in Exodus 12:12, God says that he sends the plague of the firstborn to kill all the gods of Egypt, to judge all the gods of Egypt, and that every firstborn son in the house of Pharaoh, from the highborn to the lowborn, the livestock, all the animals, all of them would die. In Exodus 12:35 or 36, I think it's on next week's slides. But it says this, Exodus 12:35 or 36. And Pharaoh awoke about midnight, and he heard crying and a great wailing in his house, and not a single house was found where there wasn't a firstborn dead. Well, what did we just learn about Pharaoh in that moment? He awoke at midnight and found all the firstborns dead. He's not a firstborn son. This is what we see here with Amenhotep III from Thutmose. This is why there's propaganda at the Sphinx about the leader of the Exodus at the time, the Pharaoh at the time of the Exodus, who's not a firstborn son, and the Bible exposes him as not a firstborn son. Y'all, and this is what is so wonderful and powerful about this moment, is that when God comes and does everything that he does, he exposes the rulers of this earth as illegitimate rulers over our lives. And I'm going to get into this a lot next week. That's the subject of next week when we talk about the 10 plagues for the 10 different gods of Egypt, and how God deals judgment on each of the individual gods, starting near the bottom of the gods and going up to the high god Ra with a plague of darkness. So, the last piece here, this is the Pharaoh at the time of the Exodus and the son. The Exodus event happens. And this Pharaoh is the Pharaoh who ultimately meets his demise in the Red Sea. Okay? Does anybody know, not like you can raise your hand and tell me, but who is Amenhotep III's son? Who is the child that dies in the plague of the Exodus? Amenhotep III's son is a very well-known character, and you may have seen this. His name is Tutankhamun. So, again, this may not be true, right? I'm walking you through some very interesting connections here. But King Tut was the son of Amenhotep III, who was Thutmose IV, who was in propaganda to be an illegitimate ruler. It fits in with the timeline of all of this. And think about this for a minute. Think about this for a minute, about how Pharaoh, and how for so many years, King Tut, I mean, he's not a remarkable king. He never really ruled. He didn't do a whole lot. But everybody knows about him because they found his tomb. And it's not a remarkable tomb. It's just got a pile of stuff in it, including this brilliant, beautiful headdress. But he was a king that really didn't do a whole lot. But isn't it interesting, if this is the king who was the son of the Pharaoh at the death of the firstborn, that God preserved that one tomb for all these years, so that the world goes and they trot King Tut around to all of the things to say, look at the mighty deeds of Egypt. Look at how amazing and powerful Egypt is. Look at the great history. And what they're doing is they're trotting out a child that was killed in the plague of the firstborn to display and demonstrate the truth of God's word. I just think that's awesome. I don't know if it's true, but it seems to make a lot of sense to me. So I've seen a couple of questions here. That's the study, right? And again, this is more history, and I'm definitely giving you a revisionist history of the timeline of the 18th dynasty of Thutmose, okay? Now, I just want to make one quick address here, and then we did pretty good, 10:15 about. So I do want to make one statement. Some of y'all may have seen the Patterns of Evidence movies by a guy, Tim Mahoney, and they've been doing this for 12, 15 years. I think that stuff is very good and very interesting, and I've researched it and studied it. They make a pretty decent case for the 13th dynasty, or the 1300s, which would be the Ramses dynasty for Pharaoh. And a lot of great Bible prophecy teachers say it's Pharaoh, was Ramses, and a bunch of other things. So I'm not trying to wade into the fight about whether it was King Tut in the Thutmoside dynasty or whether it was Ramses in the 19th dynasty or what were the Hyksos people in the Avaris digs. There's a lot of interesting stuff. I share this timeline because I think there's more evidence. It's a lot more controversial. So the Patterns of Evidence movie, I don't know if that's why they didn't include it or they linked arms with David Rohl and they got connected up with that. Watch that film. There's a couple of them. Watch them. It's really great information. But the point of this is really to root you in the testimony of the scriptures, in the historicity, and to ask a couple of questions, particularly about Egypt. I oftentimes leave this particular segment out when I teach it because it is controversial and it is revisionist history about Pharaoh. And hopefully I've done a fair job articulating what is Orthodox Egyptology and then linking up some convoluted narratives to weave a story together. Again, my purpose of doing this is not to get you to believe in Egyptian history or to have a fight on the internet, whether it was Ramses or Pharaoh, or feel proud that you know it was King Tut. It wasn't Ramses. Don't do that. The purpose of this is the scriptures. So thank you all for hanging out with me. Thank you guys. Titles of the films that I recommend. Patterns of Evidence. Okay, I'll do a quick little, let me move my mic here. I won't get as good at sound, but I'm going to move this out of the way so I can kind of put this up in here. Patterns of Evidence. By a guy, Tim Mahoney. I got the URL here. I'm going to put this in here. And I'll give you guys a couple of other links and stuff to follow up on in the coming days. There's some really good websites when I start showing you the stuff around the mountain that I'm going to point you guys to. So I'll wait for that. I'm going to go over here to my messages. I got some messages. It said some new contacts. Oh, I don't know how to use my service. I see a few of y'all messaged over at my community number. So that's great. So I will put this multi-view deal back up. Now I'm just rambling. Okay, so if you want to get connected to me, text Exodus to this number here. I'll put a link here in the chat thread as well. And we can stay connected off of Facebook that way in the coming days. Next week, I'll do session 3, 10 gods for 10 plagues for 10 gods, liberating the people out of bondage of Egypt. So thank you guys so much for hanging in there. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your interest in this, your prayers, continued prayers for our nation and pursuit of the scriptures. So, oh good, you got some of those things up there. Patterns of Evidence, movies. I'm seeing chat, Alan, in there. And maybe one of these sessions I will talk to you about Jim and Penny Caldwell and Leonard Moeller and some of their stuff. I may actually reach out to the Caldwells, see if they'd want to join me on one of these things. They're friends, and they've poured a lot into all of this stuff. But I'm just some guy that followed it and created this and just loved the Bible and the history of it. So thank you all for joining with me. Thank you for sharing. We will talk to you guys again next time.